Alright, let's talk about priority modes actually. Aperture priority, shutter priority. On a Canon, especially for the entry level, you have a TV or an AV, which stands for time value or aperture value. Okay. A lot of people, when they start off, they're afraid to use those modes, and then when they figure out what they are, they get stuck in them, and they never come back out of them. Aperture value is a great mode. It will give you the option to select your aperture size from wide open 1.4 all the way down to closed, which can be f22, f16, f32, f64. Depends on what camera you have. The aperture is a good thing to play with. It's a good thing to learn because you get to figure out what depth of field is. You get to figure out how to blur the background or how to keep things in focus or out of focus. All the while, because you're in priority mode, your camera will select the right shutter speed to expose it correctly. The only issue with that is if you are shooting at nighttime and you're in aperture priority mode, if there's not enough light, your camera may take the shutter speed down so low that you'll record your hand shaking as you shoot. That's usually anything south of 1/60th of a second. But as you get more and more advanced with shooting, you can make up for that. I can probably hand hold at a 15th of a second and still get pretty solid images. So it's nothing amazing, but it's what I do sometimes. The advantage of it is if you have good light, you can just pick an aperture, and the shutter speed has got so many different speeds that it can compensate for your light that's coming into the lens. So you can get a good exposure anywhere usually, no matter what you're shooting at, if you're shooting in good enough daylight. So yeah, a lot of people stay with aperture priority. It's pretty for doing things like blurring flowers, focusing in on somebody's eyelashes. I don't know. You can do whatever you want with it. It's easy. I prefer to shoot in time value priority though, which means you set the time and the camera will give you an aperture that will suffice for the right exposure. It's a little bit more limited when the camera can only use 8 to 16 different settings versus however many settings. Your time value can go from 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, all the way up to 8,000th of a second on some cameras. So, with that being said, you're going to pick one out of those many different settings, and the camera's going to have only the option of picking between f1.4 in this case and f16. It's way less aperture settings than there are time value settings, but with that I can know for sure that my camera is going to shoot at this speed no matter what light I have. And so my images may come out dark sometimes if there's not enough light outside at nighttime, or they may come out to be too bright sometimes if it can't go if it can't close down anymore and I'm shooting in some type of direct sunlight. But with that, I have no issue with having the camera blur. I know before I even pull the trigger that I'm going to be shooting at a set timing, and so I can either shoot at a 30th of a second all night and just know that I have to just squeeze slow, or I can set it to a 60th of a second and know that I have no issue shooting anything at regular speed. I think time value is a little bit more of a closer to a manual setting than aperture value is, just because of that, because you are limiting the camera a little bit more just by how many options it can choose for you. All of this is always going to be dependent upon your ISO setting, but ISO is pretty much just to say how sensitive your camera is to light. So that's another issue that we'll talk about some other time. Just set your ISO to 800 and just chill there. You should be good. On Canons, specifically if you have a T2i you'll see on your top right thumb in this area of the camera, you see a little star-shaped figure. That's your exposure lock, or your, yeah, it's just an exposure lock. A lot of people don't know how to use it. Basically, what you do is you pull the camera up. If you're in a priority mode, you pull your camera up, and so you got a subject with a bright background, or in this case, yeah, dark subject and a bright background. If your camera is metering for everything in this image, it may get confused depending on whether you have me in the middle of the camera or if you have me on the edge of your, on the side of your shot. I think with Canon specifically, I don't know if the later models have changed, but back when I shot with Canon, which is only 3 years ago, it was always center weighted as far as how it would evaluate your spot. That's going to get confusing. Basically, put your focal dot, your focusing point, where you want to put it, and then if you push that start button, your camera will lock those settings. You'll notice a little light will come on inside, and you'll notice that your numbers won't move anymore. If you're in aperture priority mode and you're looking through your camera and you see the little numbers at the bottom, as you move your camera around to lighter or darker things, you'll notice the numbers change. When you hit that start button, you lock your exposure on whatever it's locked on, so those numbers won't change anymore. So that's useful if I'm shooting a dark subject on a bright background and I don't want to expose for the background. I can put the camera into aperture priority mode, put my center focus point or whatever focus point I'm using on my subject, hit the lock button, hit the start button, and now no matter where I shoot with my subject in the frame, it'll expose for the subject that I locked the exposure on, if that makes sense. I try to make a video to show you what that means, but that's a very useful thing to understand. It works the same in time value and aperture value, but it's good to know. I think that's good. Does a lot.